We continue the journey through chapter 6 in John's Gospel. We started it a couple of weeks ago. We'll continue on for a couple of weeks. And Martin Luther, who was a pretty bright guy, he used to tell people that verse 16 in the third chapter of John 3:16, was the gospel in miniature. You may have seen it at baseball games. John 3:16. Like I said, Martin Luther was a pretty bright guy, but I think chapter 6, that's what you need to pay attention to in John's Gospel. Not just one verse in chapter 3, but chapter 6. And I hope you get a chance as we're going through it to actually spend some time just reading and contemplating this whole chapter at one time, because it's really quite amazing. You probably remember a couple of weeks ago, we started with the story of feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. You remember that? And all the people were pretty impressed. They said, "Free food. Not a bad deal. This Jesus, pretty good guy. Free food. Let's make him king. That'd be a great idea. We can get free food every day." Jesus took a look at them and said, "Huh, you want me to give up being God to be king of your little 2-bit country? Forget it. I'm out of here." Went off to pray. Disciples said, "Well, I guess nothing else is happening here." There was a boat around. They got in a boat, started heading over to the other side of the sea, and Jesus disappeared someplace to go pray. And you remember last week, we came back and they went looking for him the next day, and they came back to where he was and he wasn't there, and the disciples weren't there. And they said, "Well, the disciples went over to the other side of the sea, but he wasn't in the boat with them, but they went over to ask the disciples where he was, and Jesus was there." And they said, "How'd you get here?" We skipped the part in chapter 6 where he walked across the water. That wasn't important. So we skipped over that little part. If you read chapter 6, you'll get to see that part too. And then he starts talking to them. He says, "You guys, you were so excited about a free meal. Why don't you get excited about what God is doing in the world? That's more than a free meal. God is coming into the world to bring you something. God has sent me. I have come from heaven to be with you, to bring you the message of God, and you're looking for a free meal. Idiots." And now the people are beginning, like they really liked it when he was giving away free food, and they said, "Come down from heaven. Who is this guy? That's Mary and Joseph's kid. What's he coming up with all this stuff of, I've come from heaven?" They weren't all that impressed with him anymore. And he says, "Get real, guys. Nobody's going to come to me unless the Father draws them. And if you're listening to what the Father is saying to you, He's going to bring you to me, and you're going to start paying attention. But you got to stop paying attention to free food. You got to start paying attention to what has come to you from heaven. God has left heaven through me and come into the world to be a part of your life. And do you want to accept that God is doing that for you?" Pretty big statement. He goes on to say that he is the real bread that you need to have eternal life. And he'll give his flesh. He'll die for you, but also he'll give you himself to be your food, to take you into eternal life. And they're having trouble believing that. And to tell you the truth, for the first 30 years in my life, I was more on their side than Jesus' side in this gospel. Past 45 years, no, Jesus is right. But my first 30 years, I didn't see what Jesus was doing for me and for the world. Don't know, some of you may have read my little book where I tell a story about how I ended up at a mass in Toronto 45 years ago. Wasn't looking for God. I was trying to impress this girl that I was trying to impress with what a good Christian folk I was, you know. Wasn't looking for Jesus at all. Was looking for Marlene. That was my motivation for being there. Jesus said, "Okay, idiot, you're here. We should talk. We haven't talked for a long time." And during that Mass, for some reason, I received the Eucharist. Didn't know why. Wasn't anything. But 60s and 70s, we were doing all sorts of things different, so you didn't even have to go up and get it, you know. They just brought it around to us. We're all in this room. So I figured, oh, well, they're here. May as well take it. Changed my life. I suddenly knew what it was to be loved. And I knew that Jesus loved me more than I had ever been loved by anybody else, and more than I will ever be loved by anybody else. Don't remember too much more of the night, and I didn't know at that time that that was the end of being an accountant in Toronto for me. This Jesus that I had met in the Eucharist was going to take me to all sorts of strange places, different countries, into prisons, into hospitals, into nursing homes, into all sorts of places that I never would have got to if I'd stayed in an apartment in Toronto, counting money. And I'm glad he did it. Caused a lot of changes. And eventually, he got around to telling me that I want to be part of your life, and I want you to be part of my life, and I want you to bring me to people. That's why when I turned 40, I ended up moving into a seminary, watching a bunch of young kids arguing about who was going to get the remote control of the TV set. And I said, "Are you sure this is part of your plan, God?" But anyway, it worked. I'm here, and he's been with me for all these years. And he's a powerful God, and he does give us himself in the Eucharist. And I have celebrated Mass in many countries, many churches. And each time when I hold my hand over the altar and his spirit flows through my body, through those hands, into the bread and the wine, I know that my lover is still there. And he wants to be with the people who have come to receive him. It's a marvelous thing. It's 2,000 years of history of Jesus entering into people's lives and hearts, through the Eucharist. And if you want me to explain it, you're out of luck. I don't even know how to make an apple pie. I'm not going to try and explain God or how God works. I just know that He does. And I know that He's been with me for over 45 years. And the way that we connect is through the Eucharist. And He wants to do that with you today, too. But that can't happen just yet. First, I've got to shut up.